Something strange is happening across the planet right now. From Canada to Australia, from the Middle East to Africa, a pattern is emerging that nobody saw coming. Highly educated professionals, business owners, families who've lived abroad for decades are suddenly finding themselves unwanted. And they all share one thing in common. They're Indian immigrants. But here's what makes this truly shocking. These aren't random acts of prejudice. There's a complex web of reasons behind this global phenomenon. And when you understand what's really happening, you'll see the world completely differently. The numbers that changed everything. Let's start with something that will blow your mind. In 2023 alone, over 18 million Indians were living outside India. That's bigger than the entire population of the Netherlands. But here's where it gets interesting. Unlike previous waves of migration, these aren't just low-skilled workers. We're talking about doctors, engineers, tech professionals, and entrepreneurs who've built empires in their adopted countries. So why would nations that desperately need skilled workers suddenly turn against them? The answer is more complicated than you think, and it involves money, politics, and a shift in global economics that's reshaping entire societies. What happened in Canada will shock you. Canada used to be the promised land for Indian immigrants. The country actively recruited them, offering pathways to citizenship and celebrating multiculturalism. But in 2024, something changed dramatically. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government imposed harsh new restrictions specifically targeting Indian immigration. Students who had already paid thousands in tuition found their visas rejected. Skilled workers were told to leave. What triggered this sudden reversal? Hold on, because the real reason isn't what the media is telling you. The truth involves a perfect storm of problems. First, housing costs in major Canadian cities exploded. Vancouver and Toronto became unaffordable even for middle-class Canadians. And who got blamed? You guessed it, immigrants, particularly Indians who were arriving in massive numbers. But here's the twist. It wasn't actually their fault. The housing crisis was caused by decades of poor planning and local zoning laws. Yet politicians found it easier to point fingers at newcomers than fix the real problem. Then came the diplomatic breakdown between Canada and India over allegations of assassination plots on Canadian soil. And suddenly, Indian immigrants became caught in a geopolitical crossfire they never asked to be part of. The Middle East money problem. Now let's fly to the Persian Gulf, where something even more dramatic is unfolding. For 50 years, Indian workers built the gleaming cities of Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Doha. They were welcomed because they worked hard and sent money back home instead of demanding citizenship. It was the perfect arrangement, or so it seemed. But recently, Gulf nations have started pushing Indians out in favor of their own citizens. Why this sudden change after half a century? The answer involves a secret economic transformation that's been brewing for years. Here's what's really happening. Oil-rich Gulf states realize they can't depend on oil forever. They're desperately trying to create jobs for their own young populations, many of whom are educated but unemployed. Programs like Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 and UAE's Emiratization require companies to hire locals instead of foreigners. Indian workers, who once seemed indispensable, are now seen as obstacles to national development. But there's another layer to this story that makes it even more complicated. Indian immigrants in the Gulf had become so successful in business that they controlled significant portions of the economy. This economic power started making local governments nervous. When foreigners control your economy, what happens to national sovereignty? The tech industry backlash nobody expected. Silicon Valley was built on Indian talent. Walk through Google, Microsoft, or Adobe, and you'll find Indians at every level, including CEOs. Sundar Pichai, Satya Nadella, Shantanu Narayan. These names represent the American dream achieved. So why is there suddenly a backlash against H-1B visas, which bring Indian tech workers to America? The reason might surprise you, and it's dividing American society right down the middle. American tech workers started noticing something disturbing. Entry-level positions that used to go to fresh graduates were increasingly filled by experienced Indian professionals willing to work for less money. Some companies were accused of deliberately replacing American workers with cheaper foreign labor. Were these accusations fair? Partially yes, partially no. The reality is messy. Some companies did abuse the system, using visa programs to cut costs. But many Indian immigrants were simply better qualified and harder working. They'd studied relentlessly, often from childhood, in India's brutally competitive education system. This created a cultural clash. American workers felt cheated, while Indian immigrants felt they'd earned their success fairly. Both sides had legitimate grievances, but politicians exploited the division for votes, making the situation worse for everyone. Australia's hidden transformation. Australia presents perhaps the most fascinating case study. For years, Australia actively recruited Indian students, making billions from international education. Indian enrollment in Australian universities skyrocketed, but then came the shocking pivot. In late 2023 and 2024, Australia began rejecting student visas at unprecedented rates, with Indians facing the highest rejection percentages. What caused this dramatic U-turn? The answer reveals something crucial about how immigration politics really work around the world. Australian cities, particularly Melbourne and Sydney, experienced a surge in visible Indian communities. Suburbs transformed almost overnight, with Indian restaurants, grocery stores, and cultural centers appearing everywhere. For some Australians, this was exciting diversity. For others, it felt like their neighborhoods were disappearing. Then came reports of visa fraud, with some education agents selling fake admission letters and some students working illegally beyond their visa limits. Were most Indian students following the rules? Absolutely. But the bad actors gave politicians the excuse they needed to crack down on everyone. Here's the kicker. Australia's economy actually needs these students and workers desperately, especially in healthcare and technology. But political pressure from anxious voters won over economic reality. The African equation. Africa's relationship with Indian immigrants is the oldest and most complex of all. Indians have lived in East Africa for over a century, arriving initially as railway workers under British colonial rule. Many became successful merchants and professionals. But here's where history gets uncomfortable. When African nations gained independence, Indian minorities faced a terrible choice: integrate fully or face resentment as perpetual outsiders who'd benefited from colonialism. This tension has never fully disappeared. In countries like Kenya, Uganda, and South Africa, Indian communities remain economically successful but socially separate. They often marry within their community, maintain distinct cultural practices, and, crucially, control disproportionate wealth. This creates the perception, fair or not, that Indians take from African economies without truly belonging. Recent years have seen increasing pressure on these communities, with some politicians scapegoating them for economic problems. The question that haunts these situations is ancient and troubling. Can immigrant success ever be too visible without triggering backlash? Why this matters to everyone. Here's the section that brings us back to our central question. Why are so many peoples around the world wanting to push out Indian immigrants from their countries? The answer isn't simple racism, though prejudice certainly plays a role. It's a collision of economic anxiety, cultural change happening too fast for some societies to process, political opportunism, and the basic human fear of losing what feels familiar. Indians became the target partly because of their visibility and success, and partly because global migration patterns made them the largest group of skilled immigrants in many places simultaneously. But here's what makes this truly important. What's happening to Indian immigrants today could happen to any immigrant group tomorrow. The same forces driving this phenomenon apply universally. When economies struggle, when housing becomes unaffordable, when jobs feel scarce, societies look for someone to blame. Immigrants, especially successful ones, become easy targets. Understanding this pattern helps us see that the real problems are usually systemic. Bad economic policies, poor urban planning, inadequate education systems, and political leaders who exploit division instead of solving problems. The future nobody's talking about. Where does this all lead? Some experts predict Indian immigration will decrease dramatically as India's own economy grows stronger. Why leave home if opportunities exist there? Others suggest immigrant communities will become more defensive, less willing to integrate, creating permanent parallel societies. But there's a third possibility that's truly fascinating. Global migration might fragment entirely, with skilled workers choosing countries based purely on policies rather than traditional ties. If that happens, nations that pushed Indians out might desperately try to lure them back, creating a completely different dynamic. The human cost. Behind every statistic is a real person with dreams that are now uncertain. Families torn between countries. Children who don't know where home is anymore. Professionals who invested years building careers only to face deportation. These human stories get lost in political debates, but they represent the true cost of what's happening. And regardless of where you stand on immigration policy, these are real people facing real consequences through no fault of their own. What this reveals about our world. Ultimately, the global backlash against Indian immigrants exposes uncomfortable truths about modern society. We celebrate globalization when it benefits us, but reject it when it challenges us. We want the economic benefits of immigration, but struggle with the cultural changes it brings. We praise the American dream or the Australian dream until too many people actually achieve it. These contradictions define our era, and resolving them will shape the world our children inherit. Thanks so much for watching this deep dive into one of the most important global trends nobody's talking about enough. I'm really curious. Where are you watching from, and what's the immigration situation like in your city or country? Do you see similar tensions, or is your experience completely different? Drop a comment below, and let's have a real conversation about this. And hey, if you found this video valuable, hit that hype button and smash the like button. It's totally free, and it genuinely helps this channel reach more people who want to understand what's really happening in our world. Thank you so much for that. Now, check out one of the recommended videos on your screen right now to discover more incredible insights that'll change how you see everything.